We're at the Burleson Public Library. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. We have here Mr. Paul Austin. He was born December the 10th, 1921. He served in the U.S. Army from 1937 till 1945. His highest rank was Major, and he served in the Southwest Pacific. Mr. Austin, thank you for being here. Well, let's just kind of start with a few questions. Where were you born?
I was born in Fort Worth, Texas.
And tell me a little bit about your family.
I had 2 sisters, 3 brothers. Thurman was the oldest brother. Then Florence was first sister. She came next. Then Owen Austin was, and then C.A. Austin Jr. Then I came along in 1921, and then a sister, Carlene, came along about 2 years later.
Well, where did y'all live?
I was born on South Main in Fort Worth at 1717 South Main. My dad was basically a farmer, and I grew up mostly in the country on the farm. The 3 older, 2 brothers and sister, they were well on their way and had married and working in Fort Worth when I showed up. There was 3 of us when we moved down to Burleson. C.A., me, and Carlene. We moved into a house right up here on the corner where that loan company has that little red building. The house was sitting right there where that building is. We moved there in real late 1933. I began school there immediately in the 5th grade, and then in 1939 graduated from Burleson High School. And in the meantime, we had moved out to a dairy farm about a mile south of town, and we lived there 5 years and farmed and milked cows, just typical dairy business. Then in 1940, I went to work for Mr. Haskew in the hardware and lumber store. He came out and asked my dad if I was available, and he told him I was, so I worked there starting probably in June of 1940, and meantime, C.A. and I had joined the National Guard in 1937. We joined a unit in Fort Worth, the headquarters company with 144th Infantry. And the reason we did is because our brother-in-law was the company commander. And we attended summer camp with the National Guard in 37, 38, 39, but they canceled all those camps in 1940. Our company commander of headquarters company was Captain Luther Cole. He worked as a fireman in Fort Worth, but he was a captain, company commander. He was one of the finest officers and men I ever knew. It was a privilege to serve under a man like him. Many times later on, I would think about Luther when a situation would come up. I sometimes would say, how would Luther handle this? That's that's the way that it worked out. In 1940, on November the 25th, President Roosevelt had already, back about May, had issued orders for 12 National Guard divisions to become regular Army and to report on that date for duty. So on that date, we all went to the armory, put the uniform on, and little did we know it'd be going to be 5 years before we took it off. But we went to Camp Bowie down near, right outside of Brownwood. We went down there in January of 1941. And we were told we might, if the world situation improved any, we might just serve 1 year and go home. Well, it got worse. And on December the 7th, CA and I were in Brownwood on a weekend pass. And it was too early to go home. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We went into a theater to see a movie before we went to camp. And we went in to watch Sergeant York. About 10 minutes after it started, the picture went off, the sound stopped, the lights came on, and this man announced that Pearl Harbor had been attacked and bombed by the Japanese. And he said all leaves and furloughs are canceled, and all troops will report back to camp immediately. So he and I got up and went outside. I said, "Where's Pearl Harbor?" He said, "I don't know." And somebody heard us. They said, "Well, it's in the Hawaiian Islands." I didn't even know where it was. We all went to camp that night. Everybody assembled there. By midnight, there was about 25,000 troops down in Camp Bowie, counting all the support people, artillery, the quartermaster, and everybody. There was at least 25,000 men down there. So the next morning, we were told to start packing up. And that was on Monday. On all day Tuesday, we packed and we loaded trucks, and we loaded onto a freight train and, I don't know, several passenger trains. And our regiment was separated from the 36th Infantry Division and became a regimental combat team. So that left the division with only 3 regiments, which ordinarily that is all an infantry division is 3 regiments, but we had at that time 4. We were separated, and we moved by rail to Fort Lewis, Washington. And from Fort Lewis, our 3 line battalions were placed along the beach of Washington and Oregon. And our mission was to report a Japanese landing. We weren't sent there to stop one. We were sent there to report it. We could not have stopped anybody. Our men were so scattered out. You can imagine the whole coast of Washington and Oregon. One man told me his buddy was a half a mile from him down at the beach. One of a friend lives in Longview. That he's gone now. He told me that one day the lieutenant posted him on the beach. He said, "Now your next man's down there," and he said, "I just barely could see him." He said, "Next man's up here a half a mile." And he said, "You're to keep your eyes on that water out there, and if you see anything unusual, you let us know." And this man said, "Well, let me ask you a question. What if I see a Jap submarine come up out of that water out there?" The lieutenant said, "Sink it." And he said, "With this?" Anyway, we had a lot of laughs. We were based at Portland Air Base. And I was in the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon at that time. I was staff sergeant. We had been there about 2 months when I had the opportunity to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, through an officers training school, and with the possibility of coming out as a second lieutenant. They asked me if I'd like to do that, and I said, yes, I'd like to try it. So I went before a board of officers out there, and they questioned me, and I guess I passed because they sent me down there. After 13 weeks of training, when we fired every weapon that the infantry has, and then some, seemed like. On July the 23rd, 1942, I was given a little gold bar in one hand and a piece of paper in the other hand. This piece of paper said for me to report to Camp Stoneman, California, and wait there for transportation to Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. Well, there was about 1,000 of us there at that camp waiting on transportation. It came finally in the form of a mile-long line of Greyhound buses, picked us up, took us into Oakland to a pier and a huge warehouse. We went in there, and the major there told us we'd begin boarding a ship at midnight. And as I went in, I saw this big ship there anchored by the pier. At midnight, we boarded the ship. We sailed on September the 26th. Under the Bay Bridge, under the Golden Gate. I remember watching the Golden Gate Bridge slowly disappear down in that water. And then I realized that there was no land anywhere. Now, for a man out of Texas, that's a shocker to see nothing but water. We arrived in Oahu about October the 2nd or 3rd, and 17 of us in my class at OCS was assigned to the 34th Infantry. One of the regiments in the 24th Infantry Division. I was assigned to headquarters company immediately with the I&R platoon because that was kind of my background. But in a couple of months, I was transferred to Company E in our 2nd Battalion. I became a platoon leader of the 4th Platoon. The company had, back then, had 4 platoons, and the 4th Platoon carried machine guns and mortars, and that was the platoon I was given. Our training in Hawaii was not all that great. There was no place where we could use live ammunition. We were restricted to the roads and highways, except there was a place on the north end of the island we could do a little tactical training. But other than that, all we got out of Hawaii was we learned how to march 20 miles out, stay 2 or 3 days, and march 20 miles back. We were in good physical condition. But I didn't think I knew we wasn't ready for combat. I told Ollie North that we weren't ready for combat, and he was surprised by that. He said, "Why?" I said, we had never done any tactical work in the field with live ammunition. Well, in Australia, we got that opportunity. We found out what our firepower was. Actually could see it. Live ammunition. Well, the training down there, stop me anytime you want to.
Where in Australia did you land?
In Australia, we had training in squad, platoon, tactics, in the field, every day. And I could tell after about 4 or 5 months of that training, I could tell the men and myself, we were getting tired of it. I began to hear men saying, I always said, go ahead and send us into combat so we could help get this war over with. And they said, one man said, I'm tired of this training. He said, why don't they send us on up there and let us help get this thing over with? And I began to realize they were ready for combat. One man said, I'm ready to go kill somebody. Now that told us a whole lot. Pretty soon after that, we shipped up to Goodenough Island, right off of New Guinea. And we staged there for our first combat operation. This was in April of '44. Our first landing was at Hollandia, New Guinea. Now, General MacArthur had a strategy for getting back to the Philippines. And I didn't know this until years later, but people called his strategy island hopping. There were certain islands that we did not land on. And it finally dawned on us that if they didn't have an airstrip there, an airfield, we just bypassed it. He made an 800-mile leap west when we landed at Hollandia. We left, I estimate, we left at least 100,000 Japanese troops behind us. They were located on the coast of New Guinea. Three big groups of them. And on the island of Burleson. There was no airfield. But they had built a Navy station there, the Japanese had. And instead of landing there, he just bombed that naval station out of existence. He bombed it every day for 3 or 4 weeks, dropping 400 or 500 tons of bombs on it, put it out of business. So his plan was to take their airfields away from them, put our planes on those fields, and take command of the air and the sea. And that's what he did. I counted up one time on a map from personal knowledge that we took 18 airfields away from the Japanese.
On 18 different islands that you landed on?
That's right.
And those airfields, were they paved or were they just dirt?
They were dirt and gravel, sand and gravel. And some of them were cut right into the jungle.
Mm.
They had removed those huge trees and built them right in the jungle. We captured 4 airfields at Hollandia. One 8 miles east and 3 of them about 20 miles west.
Now, how long would you stay on one of these islands?
We
Or
wouldn't.
what would you do on? Would you have to fight combat with the Japanese when you were there? Or?
Yes. He knew these airfields would be not heavily defended. So his object was to take their airfields, cut off their food, their medicine, their supplies, their ammunition, just completely cut them off and leave them behind. And that's what he did.
So you and
Now,
your...
as soon as we'd get the airfield, sometimes in just a matter of hours, we'd see one of our planes land on it. And they'd go out on missions and stop, cut the communication lines to the Japanese. They get sick, they got no medicine, they get malaria, they die. They just dried up and blew away.
So you and your men, what was your role? What did you do?
Our role was to capture the fields, airfields. Our battalion captured one airfield at Hollandia, and we took it over. There was a sniper there, killed one of the engineers as he approached the field. But I think, I've always thought that the Japs at that airfield did not want to fight an entire battalion coming at them, and they left. They left a Jap Zero and a German Messerschmitt right there on the end of the airfield. All they needed was some fuel, and you could have took off in them. They was in perfect condition. They chose not to fight there.
What kind of combat did you and your men see? Was it heavy fighting or limited resistance?
The other two regiments in the division landed about 25 miles north of there. And they had some heavy fighting to get up to the 3 airfields there. Luckily, on our end of it, on the east, we did not get into a fight. We had no combat there in our part of New Guinea. And so, while we were there, in early June, we were ordered, our regiment was ordered to go to the island of Biak, situated about 150 miles off the New Guinea coast. and it's near the western end of the island. It's about 50 miles wide and 80 miles long, and a coral island. Now, the 41st Division had landed 2 regiments there, and they dropped 1 regiment off at Wackday Island to take an airfield, and they only had 2 regiments to put on BIAC, and they suddenly found out that they did not have enough manpower. Instead of 3,000 Japs being on BIAC, there was about 9,000. So our regiment joined their 2 regiments, and we were able to establish a beachhead, finally. They didn't have enough people to secure a beachhead till we got there. Now there's 3 airfields on BIAC, and our battalion captured one of them in about the 4th day. Very little resistance. Now, before we got there, the Japanese had counterattacked with tanks. They had some tanks on BIAC. And luckily, we had some Shermans located on the beach, and they went up and destroyed these Japanese tanks. The Japs almost got in behind their line that day. We took this airfield, mainly just occupied it. We moved on into the hills, and we ran into a large number of Japanese up on a high ridge, and we got into a fight. The first actual battle that I was the company commander of Fox Company. And that morning, June the 29th, 1944, we attacked this ridge, and the battle lasted nearly all day. We knocked out, first thing we did, we charged up a hill and knocked out 2 machine guns and 4 Japanese. Then we turned and went up on the big ridge, and we looked on the other side, and there was a Japanese bivouac area. And there was some 30 or 40 troops in there. We took care of them, eliminated them. Meantime, we got orders to withdraw so the artillery could start firing, because their strong point to our left, Easy Company could not take that hill. They tried 3 times, but they were taking so many casualties that they couldn't take it.
What was in your mind during all of this?
To stay alive and keep my men alive. We were told from day one, take care of your men. And that's what you had. That's what you had to do. You had to fight for them, and they fight for you. Take care of one another. And on this day, the lieutenant of the left platoon sent out a squad to secure our left flank. We knew the Japs were right up there, about 150 yards, a lot of them. They were well dug in. Easy Company could not take it. So our men walked out there to secure our left flank, and the Japs popped up out of the ground, about 15 of them, and shot them down. And I had 7 men killed that day. One of them was a medical corps man, who did not have to go out there, but he decided to go with them. The platoon sergeant decided to go out there with him, and he was killed. So the lieutenant looked at me and he said, "I've got 7 men out here and they're all dead." I said, "How do you know they're dead?" "Well, I've been out there and checked them." Now they were lying in grass about this high, thick green grass on the side of that ridge. He'd been out and checked them. He said that they're all dead. But something in me told me, kept telling me, you don't leave this area until you know you're not leaving a wounded man. That feeling in me was so strong that I couldn't do anything about it. I just told him, I said, we're not going to leave here until I know we're not leaving a wounded man. And I crawled out straight to a man in this grass. I looked over his boots, blinked his eyes. I drug him out, back to safety, and we left there. So that was 7 killed and 1 wounded. No, there was another wounded, 2 wounded in that battle. But we had inflicted heavy damage on them. 2 or 3 days after that area was cleared out, the intelligence people walked through there and they counted 144 Jap bodies. The artillery killed a lot of them. And they fired artillery on that strong point all night. This ended our stay on BIAC. We went back to the beach. We went back to New Guinea. I was awarded the Combat Infantry Badge. Like every soldier that got in combat, he was given a Combat Infantry Badge. I was awarded 2 Silver Stars, one for dragging a wounded man back to safety, and the other Silver Star was for leading a 500-yard bayonet charge in broad daylight at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I led it all the way, right along with both platoons. Took us about 15 minutes to capture a bridge. The Liberation Medal came about as a Philippine government thing. And if you was in combat in the Philippine Islands, you were awarded this medal. The Bronze Star is for a meritorious deed in action, combat action.
Well, keep telling me about where all that you went, and how was the mood of the men that you were with as the war continued? Were you aware, for instance, when the war in Europe was winding down, what was your feelings about the continuing war in the Pacific?
The men didn't change. We left Australia ready to help get this war over, and we was still thinking that way before we went to Leyte. Everywhere we went, our minds mostly was, let's go and get it over with. Let's take care of each other, let's fight them, and get it so we can go home. That was the thinking. And fight for each other. We had the buddy system. 2 men in a foxhole. One can sleep, one stay awake, half the night, take care of each other. And we sailed for Leyte about the 14th of October, 1944. We landed on Leyte Island on October the 20th at about 10 o'clock. On the way in our boats, we went through a literal shower of artillery and mortar shells. The Japanese were there waiting for us, and when we were about a mile from the beach, the shells started falling. The boat right behind the boat I was in, we all heard a loud explosion. We looked back, and this boat was gone. There was a plume of water there, and we could see pieces of the boat in the water.
How many men were in one of those boats?
30 men and a coxswain, Navy man, and a boat gone in just a split second. Other boats were hit. And one of the landing craft, larger landing craft, was hit. It was on fire and dead in the water. And this was their plan, though. They were going to take all the casualties they could while we were coming in. Their plan then called for them to retreat, go back in the hills there, and prepare for a counterattack. So when we got on the beach, there was no firing except snipers. I believe there was 4 or 5 of them. And one of them shot the company commander through the head. He hadn't been on the beach for about 5 minutes. And the sniper shot the regimental intelligence officer through the head. The machine gun fired at K Company, and they got down on the edge of the beach there, laid down. The lieutenant told them to get down. That machine gun didn't fire anymore. Because once he got the guys pinned down, he grabbed his gun and took off in order to get ready for the counterattack. That's my theory. We landed, ran in under the coconut trees, hit the jungle, kept moving, waded through a rice paddy about this deep, chest deep. I kept thinking I'm going to step in a hole in a minute and drown right here. But we made it across there and didn't lose anybody, and we hadn't had a casualty yet. K Company had gone through the jungle ahead of us, and I know they took out one sniper. We passed through K Company and went on to about a mile to a highway, and we dug in around our battalion dug in around a little village called Pawing. And the colonel said, get ready for get ready for a night attack. Well, I told the men, dig them deep, because we're going to have trouble. F Company dug in a line, then E Company, then G Company. H Company in the center with the mortars. G Company put a roadblock down there about 500 yards on the highway. And we were looking south. We knew the attack was going to come from south. They hit us at about 1:30 in the morning. They announced their coming with a mortar shell that evidently came right over my foxhole and hit a little building right behind me. I often wondered if a Jap spy had been in that little town that evening, because there's all kind of people milling around there, Filipinos. And I wondered sometime if he took note of where I dug my fire hole. He could see my insignia on my helmet. And they took a shot at me, I think, with that first mortar. But it was too long. This building is about 40 feet over. And that night, they hit us. The roadblock stopped two companies with just a fierce firefight. Harold Moon won the Medal of Honor by staying on his post with a submachine gun, and they counted 53 bodies in front of his. He said, "You men, get your stuff and get out of here. I'll cover you. I'll stay here and cover you." And they left. He wanted them to. And he stayed there, and he killed Japanese for 2 hours. And the third company, now they hit us with about 800 men. The third company veered off to the left, and here we are, and they came right into the center of Fox Company. Now it was still dark, about 4:30, 5 o'clock, and the boys out on the front there, they could hear them coming, walking through the grass. And somebody out on the line said open fire, and our line put out a murderous amount of fire. Those M1s were firing on fast fire. And fire 8 rounds, reload in 2 seconds, fire 8 more. And the noise was of that 80 some odd rifles firing that night. I'll never forget the noise it made. It was like thunder. They finally broke through the roadblock and killed Moon, Private Moon. They killed him with bayonets. And he was from California. We estimated that there was between 700 and 800 bodies out in that field, Japanese bodies. When 2 or 3 days later we walked through there down that highway, you could see all of them laying around out there. This field over here was full of bodies. Another thing, an airstrike came in about sunup. 5 fighter planes struck them with 50 calibers and bombs. And that more or less finished them off. But we stood up to eat our breakfast, and there was a man out on the line stood up, and one Jap out there shot him in the leg. And he and the lieutenant were wounded that night. We had 2 casualties that night in Fox Company. Next day, we attacked the ridge that would be a part of securing the beachhead. They would not unload the heavy stuff until the beachhead was secure.
Our tape will probably not last much longer. Do you?
We had 4 battles on Leyte, Fox Company. And we had a tremendous battle on Luzon and Zigzag Pass on Bataan. From there, I was given a 45-day leave back in the States. I got on the ship and came home. Germans surrendered, I didn't have to go back. I went to Fort Hood, they dropped a big bomb, they said you can go home and stay home. And that was the end of it.
What did you think about the surrenders in Europe and the Japanese? What was the emotion among you and your men?
Well, it just great relief. Relief. Home at last. We can stay home. We can go back to normal life and wear some civilian clothes. But I'll never forget Fort Hood. This major said, "Now, Austin, I can send you back to your company or your in the Philippines if you want to go, or I can send you to Fort Hood." I said, I'll be able to take Fort Hood. I got a company down there of 225 men, and they were all getting ready to invade Japan. They didn't have to go,
So,
thanks to Harry Truman.
so when did you leave the service?
I left it in October, regular service. I left it in October of 1945. But early in 46, I rejoined the National Guard as the company commander in the Armored Division here in Fort Worth. And I was just with them 3 years, and then I resigned. I did not retire, I resigned. Because I got a job with a telephone company, and I was on call day and night, and I just decided I could not work for the National Guard and the telephone company at the same time.
Well, very briefly, I think our tape will probably run out soon. I just don't want to stop you, but what have you done in the years since? Where did you retire from the telephone
I retired from the telephone company after 31 years, and I've enjoyed retirement. I've never regretted it one day. We traveled. We did a lot of traveling. And we went places we've been talking about. We had friends in Arlington that wanted to go with us, so they wanted us to go with them. And we went to several reunions of our division, be in different cities every year. We went to several of those. And then as we got older, we kind of backed off this traveling. And now we're just coming and going from the grocery store to the doctor and to the church and drugstore, and that's about it. I got a couple of hobbies. She's got a hobby going. I've got a couple of hobbies going. And we're doing just fine.
Well, I tell you, Mr. Austin, thank you very much for coming and talking.